The year was 1888. St. Jude's Monastery stood high on a wooded rise above the river. Its stone arches and faded slate silhouetted each morning against the fog that curled above the valley. Catherine waited in the chill just before dawn, listening for the quiet, patient hush inside the nave. The monastery's walls bore the labour of centuries. She ran a gloved hand along the southern aisle as she walked, fingers tracing seam and scar in the limestone, a habit learned in long afternoons spent cataloguing masonry. On this morning, her touch paused at something odd, a splash of discoloration high on the south wall. By lamplight, it appeared almost a bruise beneath the thin lime wash, wide as her hand and faintly iridescent. She squinted. The stone here swirled with subtle greens and blues, like the skin of a pond seen at dusk. For an instant, she thought it dust or mildew, but neither washed out under her hand. The cold air prickled at her neck. Who had left so muted a mark, and when? Catherine moved back, letting her gaze drift from the anomaly to the sweep of the nave itself. Every stone, a ledger of patience and persistence. Built in the spring of 1148, with funds from the de Montfort family, St. Jude's had survived siege, blackout, and time's slow erasure. Monks and archivists alike had left records of repairs to its portico and crypt, but nothing of the south wall's strange patch. She pressed her palm to the stone, feeling the chill set into her bones. These ancient walls held more than mortar and memory. As daylight edged in through the rose window, she resolved to return with better light and fresh eyes. There was something here beneath the centuries' hush, waiting to be seen. That afternoon, Catherine returned with the archivist's battered brass lantern. The flame, shielded behind mica panes, cast a narrow golden beam across the nave. She waited for dusk, knowing that only then did the sun's angle sharpen shadows and make the wall's secrets rise. The south wall shimmered under the lantern's touch, a faint pattern resolving, then vanishing, as she moved the light. With careful precision, Catherine inched the lantern upward, watching as thin, broken lines emerged, tracing arcs beneath the lime wash. At first, it seemed chaos, a rash of faint scratches and blurred contours. But as her eyes adjusted, a coherence appeared. The shapes were not random. Rectangles blossomed into interlaced diamonds, then into intricate whorls and sunbursts. She reached for her notebook, sketching quickly, afraid the shapes would slip away with the light. She measured with a length of knotted string, noting the pattern's span, a shoulder's breadth, smaller than public frescoes of the 12th century, but deliberate. Catherine compared the forms to the motifs she'd catalogued in the monastery's library. The meander, the key, the interlace. These echoed the geometric rigour of Byzantine ornament, especially those found in the mosaics of Ravenna and Thessaloniki. Yet the pattern here seemed more experimental, borrowing from both the East's tessellated geometry and the Western fondness for foliate curls. She worked in silence, aware of the shifting shafts of evening sun. As the pattern's outline grew clearer, a thought pressed at her. This was no idle decoration. It was laid with intention, perhaps a message drawn into the monastery's bones. She noted the junctions, each intersection meticulously planned. The wall was not so silent now. Its language, patient and exacting, began to surface. With the pattern mapped, Catherine focused on the colour itself. She drew out a slender toolkit, the brushes and scalpels worn smooth by years of handling. Among the dust she lifted tiny flecks, blue and green, brighter than the surrounding plaster. She placed one on a glass slide, then stepped into the cloister's cramped office, where an old chemical lamp and jars of reagents waited. She dissolved a fragment in dilute acid and watched for any shimmer of reaction. The result was immediate. a brief flare of turquoise, then gold. This, she realized, matched descriptions of ancient copper silicate compounds, such as Egyptian blue, rarely used in Western Europe after the fall of Rome. Catherine thumbed through a battered 1846 treatise on mineral dyes, recalling it noted only 3 recorded uses of copper-based blue in England before the Renaissance, each carefully annotated and dated. Next, she prepared a scrap for the microscope, counting ground crystals. The grain size and composition suggested a technique far older than the current lime wash. The pigment mixed painstakingly with organic binder, much like those used in the 9th and 10th centuries. She cross-referenced notes from recent restorations at Ely and Durham, but none mentioned so vivid an application. Finally, Catherine attempted a rudimentary dating by inspecting the calcified matrix binding pigment to stone. She estimated the fresco predated most of the monastery's surface paintwork, perhaps by as much as 300 years. The implication forced her breath shallow. This fragment was no mere medieval repair. It was ancient, possibly hidden since the earliest foundation of St. Jude's. It seemed the walls had sealed away a vision lost and found only by chance, a secret older than any known hand in the monastery's ledgers. The east wall, where the pigment glimmered like submerged treasure, had a hollow sound beneath Catherine's careful knuckles. She hesitated, then pressed with both hands against the lowest corner brick, convincing herself it was only curiosity and not hope that guided her. The brick slid with a reluctant rasp, revealing a pocket of musty air and a parchment envelope face down amongst withered spiders' legs. Inside, the letter had yellowed, but not decayed, the script bird-like and uneven, as if dashed off in secret. The date in one corner, June the 12th, 1650. It was addressed to the Most Reverend Father Abbot, and bore no name, only the sign, In Servitio Scriptorius. There were mentions of the south transept's painted phantasm, and references to repairs commissioned but never finished. The scribe complained of colours, heretofore unseen since the days of the first foundation, and described a patron, come in winter's heart, who bade our best craftsmen labour in strictest secrecy, under pain of silence, sworn by candle and by his cross. Catherine's eyes caught on a line mentioning the Lady Isabeau, who sent by ship from Bordeaux the tiniest caskets, each filled with powder the colour of sea at dusk. The writer fretted over strange blue dust that burns cold upon the skin, and noted Abbot Elias's insistence that no record be made of the commission's cost or purpose. There was gossip, too, about the lady's devotion, her penchant for foreign relics, and the stoneworker, Father Geraint, who slept by the wall he painted, in days of plague and frost. The letter crackled as Catherine folded it again. Its tone veered between warning and awe. The fresco was no humble ornament. It was something someone had wanted half forgotten, its purpose as veiled as the pigment behind centuries of lime. Catherine brought her torch close, mapping each detail as the fresco's revealed surface clawed its way from layer to layer. The paintwork now described the arc of a figure, an angel, she realized, but not the gentle messengers that graced most medieval chapels. This one stood with one sandal poised on a coiled serpent, wings stretched bronze gold, in one hand a scroll etched with tiny marks, and the other a raised chalice overflowing with something that looked like flame. Symbols clustered around the margins, rings, eyes, stars haloed with red. Catherine thumbed her notepad open to the page she'd labelled Possible Apocalyptic Motifs and compared sketches. The serpent beneath the angel's foot seemed clear, echoing Revelation's dragon subdued. The scroll, perhaps, was the sealed message, None may open save the Lamb. Yet the chalice with fire puzzled her. It was neither the cup of communion nor the vessel of wrath, as envisioned in most church iconography. Then she remembered a marginal illustration from an old psalter in the Lambeth Palace archives, a similar cup surrounded by tongues of fire, representing wisdom descending at Pentecost. Was this fresco blending apocalypse and epiphany, doom and enlightenment? Above the angel's head, barely visible, floated a cluster of tiny ships, sails filled with some invisible wind. Ships as the faith's journey. The Lady Isabeau's ships, Catherine realized, recalling the letter's reference. She stepped back to take in the whole. A narrative in fragments. Evil subdued, word revealed, knowledge ignited and carried forth across uncertain seas. In the hush, Catherine felt the message running beneath her fingertips. The hidden fresco told a story not just of final days, but of the perilous trust in knowledge, precious, dangerous, and always journeying. A shaft of late afternoon light edged its way through the glass above the organ loft, illuminating the wall bit by bit as the sun dropped. Catherine watched how the rays crossed the battered plaster, each luminous patch setting pigment alive in a new order. The serpent's coils seemed to writhe as the angle shifted, shadows limned blue and green by the Egyptian pigment. The angel's wings, dulled in shade, flared with iridescence for a brief instant, then faded. She tracked the movement. As the minutes unfurled, the chalice's contents, painted flames, appeared to flicker and leap, a trick of angled dust and uneven plaster. The flickering threw slivers of light over the scroll, the script shimmering as if animated, unreadable but urgent. And then, as shadow climbed higher, the ship's sails caught the last sun, each miniature triangle flashing gold before vanishing into dusk on the ancient lime. Now she saw what the artisans had meant. The fresco was built to live within the changing day, bound to the turning of the sun. It wasn't a single scene, but a ritual drama that played out only as light moved across the wall. She scribbled notes as quickly as she could. Not static, timed to season, timed to prayer. The truth was in the choreography of pigment and shadow, the angel's victory and the fire's touch branching and retreating with each change of light. In this fleeting theatre, Catherine realized, the monks had watched their knowledge ignite and journey forward every time day became evening. The story hid in plain sight, reenacted in shadows, a silent, patient code whispered by the stones. Catherine returned to her cramped room, the soft yellow of her desk lamp a poor substitute for the cathedral hush that lingered in the nave. She opened her laptop, fingers trembling with the newness of what she had seen, and typed a name. Dr. Marius Reinhardt, University of Regensburg, Department of Medieval Art. 3 years earlier, she had heard him speak, the kind of talk where centuries-old pigments seemed to glow with living memory. She found his email, attached photos of the shifting fresco, and wrote, "Is there precedent for iconography that changes with daylight? Have you seen anything like this sequence? Angel, chalice, ship." The answer came in less than a day. At 3:12 a.m., Reinhardt replied in clipped, excited English. "Catherine, what you have is remarkable. Compare with San Michele, Lucca, late 12th century, scroll motif. But yours is more elaborate. The pairing of chalice and ship in sequence is extremely rare. I attach images of the Codex Sangalensis 347, folio 92V. See the interplay of fire and sail. Your images suggest intentional design, a liturgical narrative rather than simple illustration." He included a scan from Studies in Architectural Light and Liturgy, 1997. His highlighted notes danced alongside hers, a red circle around the Latin for flame, a margin scrawl. Solar drama, Vespertine prayer. The codex reference showed flames unfurling from a cup, sails flaring gold in the margin next to a prayer for travelers. Marius's final line struck home. I confirm, this is a program. The sequence and its timing are deliberate. Reading this, Catherine felt a pulse of certainty. The code she had followed, the one spelled out by moving shadows, had precedent, and now scholarly recognition. The fresco's language, once silent, was beginning to speak. She spread the archivist's letter, delicate and browning, across the same desk. The familiar signature, Brother Anselm, anchored her. The letter spoke of a mural written for remembrance, whose language lifts with the sun, and referenced the maritime pilgrims of the late 1100s arriving after storms, bearing a gospel for the quiet English coast. It paired with her notes, each phrase now carrying weight. Lit candle in the chalice, she murmured, recalling Reinhardt's comparison. A prayer for safe passage. The illuminated flames, the gold sails, even the script, illegible up close, but structured, rhythmic, read now as a blessing for departure and return. Catherine layered the photographs from her phone, arranging them beside the transcribed lines from Anselm's letter. We hid hope, the letter confessed, in brightness and in dusk for those who feared the crossing. She traced the artist's ghostly brushwork, the angel planting fire in the cup, flames travelling upward, flare by flare, until the heat launched onto the tiny ships, pushing them forth. The movement was not just artistic, it was a negotiation with fate, a prayer cued to every sunset when monks and travellers convened for evensong. Now she saw. The fresco was not for viewing, but for participation. At the right hour, its story unfolded above the monks' bowed heads. A secret liturgy of survival, she whispered, voice trembling. The monastery's hidden fresco was a prayer in shifting gold, encoded not in pigment alone, but in the passing light, a testament to hope in uncertain tides. The nave stood hushed in last light, dust motes slowly settling as Catherine faced the ancient wall. Her notebook now lay closed on the step beside her, its pages no longer frantic, but resting, ready. She stood motionless before the fresco's center, angel, chalice, ship, bathed in dusk's lingering glow. The painted flames no longer flickered. The ship's sails, once gold, had returned to shadow. Only the outline of the narrative remained, steady and silent. For a long while she watched, letting meaning gather and settle. Everything that had seemed hidden or uncertain now felt clear, connected. The monk's hurried confession in ink, the scholar's annotated facts, the flicker and fade choreographed across centuries. How many evenings had passed in this room? The fresco performing its silent ritual, the monks understanding, visitors blind. She exhaled. The story was no longer lost. Sunset burrowed deeper, colour draining from the nave. Catherine let her gaze travel once more along the arc of pigment, feeling at last what Brother Anselm must have felt. A hope placed gently in the care of stone and story. The silence was not empty, but filled with gratitude. She pressed her hand to the nave's cool wall, anchoring herself. The hidden prayer had found its witness at last, and peace settled, patient, over the stones. For several quiet hours, Catherine lingered in the nave long after the fresco's drama had played itself into twilight. With her flashlight off, her thoughts worked loose from the day's intensity and drifted through the hush of the sanctuary. The monks had retired behind the cloistered doors, leaving her alone with flaking lime and swathes of cold air. In this new hush, she let the burden of discovery settle. A weight, yes, but also a gift. She made her way down the central aisle and turned for a last measured study of the wall. The story embedded here would not fade again. It would be catalogued, published, laid out for scholars and pilgrims alike. Still, Catherine felt a reluctance, a protectiveness. How easy it would be, she thought, for this secret to be masked by explanation, distanced by labels. Responsible stewardship meant more than documentation. It was memory, handed from hand to hand, shaped by care and humility. She fetched her notebook, pages now neat with her final sketches and notes. The figures, the trembling gold, the small, coded gestures of the past glimmered on paper as clearly as on the wall. She understood the fresco differently now. What had seemed decorative was evidence. Art as testimony, confession, hope. Brother Anselm's fear and faith, all fused in his brushstrokes, were not relics but voices, asking to be heard. Catherine placed her palm above the faded chalice as if to listen. History felt less like a locked volume and more like a trust, living because of those willing to see. She promised herself to return, to stand quietly and remember, to keep the legacy visible, fragile but unbroken, so that long after her own study had ended, this hidden truth would not vanish again into ordinary stone.